special podcast presentation from 700WLW.com. This is Doc Thompson On Demand.
I don't think I'd want one in my neighborhood. No, you move to a neighborhood for certain reasons. Well, sometimes you're forced to live in certain areas because you don't have the financial wherewithal to move to certain areas, or your job requires you to be in a certain area. But excluding those things, why do you move to a community? Why do you move to a particular city or township or a county or an area? Because of the quality of life. Now, that's a big umbrella that can include a lot of things. Lack of crime, greenery, open space, access to certain businesses. There's all kinds of things that go into why you would move to a certain area. Would public housing, if you are not living in public housing, be a motivating factor for you to move to a certain area? Has anybody said, other than people living in public housing, I got to go there because they have a lot of public housing? No. In fact, I would think that a lot of people would say, I'm not moving there because they have a lot of public housing. If you were to just survey and ask people, what's great about your area? If you were to take a survey of people who do not live in public housing, and you were to say, what is great about your area? Do you think public housing would fall in the top 1,000 for most people? No. But if you said, what would prevent you? You took a survey and said, what would prevent you from moving to an area? I'm thinking public housing, a lot of public housing in the neighborhood would be something that would deter people from moving there. Oh, they would say, bad schools, stuff like that, depressed economy, crime. But public housing is going to be one of those things that make you kind of shy away, isn't it? So what if you're living in an area right now that doesn't have a lot of public housing, and you find out your city or township is going to put in a public housing development? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or nothing at all? I say it's probably a bad thing. Certainly considerations about crime, lower property values. Those are not good things. You really want your property values to go down now when they've already gone down? You really want to have it worth less while we're paying more and more? You really want to see the crime? I can't think of a public housing unit that I am aware of, and I'm aware of a lot of them across the country, living different areas, been in different communities, witnessed to some. I've known plenty of people that have lived in public housing. I can't think of anyone that would rate higher on a scale than bad. And a whole lot of them, absolute rat holes. Do they start off that way? Do public housing units start off as horrible places? When the government pours tax dollars into building public housing units, do they build them substandard? Do they build them, with broken windows? No, it's just the opposite. They have to build them to a higher standard quite often. Now the big push is to build them green, to include solar panels and all kinds of stuff. They include public spaces. They make sure these things are nice. What do those public housing units look like a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later? Are they just as nice? I've never seen them that are just as nice. And I'm not talking just normal wear and tear or depreciation. No, they become rat holes because there's no incentive for the people living in them to keep them nice. They tear them up and they'll get another one. We just keep building public housing unit after public housing unit. What is the incentive for people there to break out of the cycle? They get the public housing free. They don't have to keep it nice. And even if they wanted to, usually their neighbors aren't the right sort of people to want to keep it nice. So you're battling that. What is your image of public housing? Dirty, well, I'll tell you mine, and if you have a different one, by all means, share it. Dirty, run down, drug and crime riddled. Now, do you want that down at the end of your street? I don't. no way I want that. But there's a push on right now by the federal government to rapidly and vastly expand the amount of public housing. They are throwing money at it. This is something the federal officials are working on. They are pressing the housing authority to expand public housing to the suburbs all across the country. And now, that's what's happening in Hamilton County. Plans for hundreds of new public housing units in cities and townships, not in the city, but in the county, is what's being worked on. There's an agreement that the county and the city of Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority, they're recommending 375 units to the 482 units already in place outside the city, increasing it about 80%. I don't want it. Would you want it in your area? You think that's good for your area? I would say public housing in general is not good for your area. Why would you want public housing? What is the point? What is the goal of public housing? What is the goal? To give people a place to live that are poor, right? People that can't afford. All right. What is your end game? Is that the extent of your mission? To provide people who cannot afford housing a place to live? Is that your end game? Where does it stop? Is it there do they get it for a limited amount of time? Or is it just, hey, you're poor, here's public housing for 1,000 years. You can have it as long as you're alive. Is that the end game? If you are sensitive to the fact that there are some people who truly need help with housing, and I would think that is a very low number by comparison to people that are actually in public housing right now or get public assistance, a very small percentage that really need the help. What is the end game? That they will have it forever? That it is a limited time? What incentive do you have for it being only limited? I would worry about crime and property values right off the top. I don't want them in my neighborhood. And if I knew that it was coming into my neighborhood, I would do everything I could to sell my property and move out. Now, right now, that's not the best option, or you don't have a lot of option with that because the housing market's down. Houses are, we talked about it yesterday, they're not selling as quickly. It's more of a struggle. You're getting generally less than what you may think you would need out of your house or property or would have gotten just a couple of years ago. But I would do everything I could. Because I know in the end, or I would expect in the end, 5 years, 10 years down the road, that guess what? My property values are going to be less. I might as well try to cut my loss now. Some of this stems from an agreement reached after a lawsuit in 86. There was a lawsuit that in 86 accused the county commissioners then and a bunch of communities around the area of discrimination based on race for interfering with efforts to expand public housing beyond the limits of the city of Cincinnati. Of course, that's always going to be the claim. If you don't want public housing, what's it going to be? Well, you're just a racist. Why would that be? There's all kinds of different races that live in public housing. It knows no racial bounds. All people are eligible regardless of race. That is federal law. All shapes, sizes, ethnicities, genders, sexual orientations, all of these things, ages, they all live in public housing. It's not exclusive. But regardless of that, lawsuit in 86 said you're just trying to discriminate. You're trying to keep certain people out if you don't allow public housing. So the settlement required that communities outside of Cincinnati accept some public housing or, and here it comes, lose those magical federal dollars. So now the federal government is leaning on them. And it's not just here, it's all over. You don't do what we want, guess what? You're not going to get those federal dollars. So my question is, do you want public housing in your neighborhood? Do you think that's good for your neighborhood, or am I just being ignorant? 513-749-7800, the big one, or pound 700 on AT&T. Commissioner Chris Monzel said that he's wary of the impact that public housing could have on certain communities. So he's considered voting against the proposal. He said, I think it's a pretty serious issue. At the end of the day, I want to do what's best for the county. All right, that makes sense. But Commissioner Hartman says that the county may not have a choice because of that lawsuit in 86 and the settlement in 87 that allows communities to opt out, but not the county. So the county still has to push this. And any of those communities that already got federal dollars, some of them may be already on the hook for it. So you may be living in a community, a township, a city in the county that has accepted federal dollars in the past that had these strings attached to it that maybe you weren't aware of. Hey, maybe the people that you have in office that you've elected, maybe they weren't aware of it or didn't put a lot of emphasis on it. So now you may not have a choice. It may be coming to your city. Is that what you want? It's not what I want. Your call's coming up next, 700 WL. Your Fox 19 Storm Tracker forecast for meteorologist Frank Marzullo. There's a slight chance of thunderstorms or a severe risk of thunderstorms after 2 o'clock today. It's going to be warm and muggy, high 83. Early T-storms tonight, overnight low 65. Clouds and a mix of sun and clouds and thunderstorms tomorrow with a high near 79. It's 70 right now, 700 WLW. I'm thinking that we may need to reevaluate who needs public housing. The criteria, reevaluate the criteria, public housing, welfare in this, because there's a whole lot of people out there, I think, that are just saying, hey, I might as well take advantage of free stuff. Are you familiar with it? I've never lived in public housing. I've been fortunate enough that I haven't had to. I know people who've had. I've been around it. I want to know if you've worked in it. I hear the biggest horror stories from people who have to go and work in public housing. They're a contractor, hired to fix something that was broken there. Sometimes police officers have to deal with it. And the stories that I'm told are stunning. And that's what we've created. I think the public housing lends itself to that environment. It's not bad people. I think it's the environment. You get in there, you know it's free. You don't have to take care of it. A lot of people are not people that have a great deal of money or they wouldn't be in public housing. And what happens? You're not working. So you have the idle hands factor. People that are looking for an escape, so what do? Gluck, 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 gluck. Drink it up or smoke it up. And then you get the busybody factor because you're not busy enough. You're not busy enough because you're not working, so you get the Gladys Kravitz. Abner, look at what they're doing. People looking and worrying and what everybody else is doing. If you're out there busting your back, if you're out there when you come home, you don't have time for any of that stuff. You don't have time you're too tired. Listen, I just want to get a full belly and go to sleep. If you're working that hard, you don't have to worry about that stuff. Frederick, Northwest Ohio, you're on 700 WLW.
Thanks so much for taking my call. I first want to start off by saying the gentleman whose time slot that you slid into, I was a huge fan of his show, and it took me a couple of weeks, but you won me over. I fought it at first, but I'm a big fan, and I really enjoy the show.
Frederick, I really appreciate the kind words. He does a great job, and that's quite an honor for you to say.
Sure.
Thank you.
Listen, I worked in the cable industry in collections in Northwest Ohio for a major cable supplier, and one of the things that drove me nuts, my wife and I work very hard for what we have. We're not rich by any sense, but the amount of times I would go into government subsidized public housing and pull out 3 or 4 HD boxes and see a 16-inch flat panel television, and it would drive me nuts. And then I'd go home to my little 32-inch tube television. It's just enough to drive you insane. And I think a lot of it, what it has to do is personal pride. I'm proud of the things that I have. And I work, like I said, I work hard for those things. And those things are kind of a reflection of me and how I treat those things. And a lot of the property managers are to blame as far as the values go. There are certain rules that apply that people follow. I can't tell you how many times I've seen cops, constantly in and out of these places. And I'm not saying it's bad people, but I think more than anything, it has to do with your personal pride. And you do probably fall in. I've never gotten government subsidized anything. But I would imagine once you're given something, it's easy to get something and continue on that track. That's all I'll say. I'll listen to your comments off the air, and thanks again for taking my call. Love your show.
Thanks, Frederick. I really appreciate it. No, I don't. These are not bad people. That's not the point. I'm not trying to chastise or cast aspersions on people that are in public housing that say they have some character flaw. These are things that a lot of us could fall into. Part of it is an environmental, but public housing creates that environment, I think. Have you ever been unemployed for a while? I have. If you listen to this show, you can understand that. No, I've been through that, where I've been off work for a while, and the depression sets in, and the desperation. I got to get a job, and you go and look for a job, and there's nothing out there. Then the idle hands, and you start worrying about all kinds of stuff that you shouldn't be worried about. Now, contrast that to someday when you've really worked hard. You ever put in a full day at work, and then you get home and put in another full day at work? You've got some, minor catastrophe, and you're moving or something like that. When you get home, are you worried about what the neighbors are doing? Are you out there selling crack? No, you just want a full belly and to go to bed. That's it. Well, we're creating just the opposite atmosphere. We're creating the atmosphere where people are worried about what other people are doing, and they're not working hard enough to be tired. So they get involved in all the garbage out there. Work is its own reward, and hard work definitely is. How come those people aren't volunteering? They would be better off if they spent their time out volunteering, picking up trash, not as court ordered or, not because they're going to get something else out of it, just to do it. They'd be helping somebody else. I'll bet if you ask a lot of people in public housing, because they have a very progressive mindset, they would say, oh, it's great. Of course we need to get stuff. We need to help people, and the government's helping us. Well, you have a bunch of free time on your hand. Who are you helping? Tony Westchester, you're on the big one.
Thank you for taking my call, Doc. I love your show. That guy, the last caller, put it on in perspective to me, because I've been working very hard ever since I was 11 years old. But, this whole concept of government housing and everything, why isn't there something based and put in writing that these people got to do something like you just stated? And if there's any drugs found or anything like that, they're out of there, because we, the people, are paying for their luxuries.
I agree. The only problem,
even though there's not much luxury there, but
no, and I agree with that, Tony. And I brought up the topic of whether or not you should be drug tested for welfare a couple of weeks ago. The problem is, as soon as you say that, you've got the people who are crazy or agenda driven or whatever that just say it's racism or you're violating civil rights, not based on race, but just, why should you look closely at these people because they are poor? You're making the assumption that they're all on drugs. No. If they're living on their own dime, I say do what you want. As long as you're not breaking the law, live on your dime, fine. But if you're living on mine, I want some reassurances. I want some reassurances that you are being fiscally responsible with what I'm giving you and you don't have other monies coming in. I think that's reasonable. Why not drug test people in public housing? You want to continue to get it once a month or so, or whatever we deem, maybe some random ones. You got to come in, pee in a cup. Why isn't that reasonable? More of your calls, and I've also got some people who want to chime in on having lived in public housing coming up next. 700 WLW. All right, I was just in the newsroom trying to get more information. We had 2 tree trimmers in Liberty Township that were struck by lightning. That's all we know so far. We don't know their status. I'm hoping for the best. We will keep you up to date as soon as we get more details. But at this point, we know the 2 tree trimmers in Liberty Township were struck by lightning just a little bit ago. Hopefully, they're all right. Public housing expanding throughout Hamilton County. And this is going on all over the country. I mean, why should the public housing be stuck in, urban centers and cities? It should be expanded to other areas, townships and smaller cities and other communities, right? I just don't want it around. I don't like the attitude that it brings. It's not the people, it's the attitude. Some of it you become institutionalized. I don't want it. Do you think if it expands throughout Hamilton County, it's going to be an Indian Hill? You think? JT sent me an email, doc at 700WLW.com, and asked that. I would think probably not, but you know what? I'm a little bit cynical, so we'll have to wait and see. Edwin out of Sal, you're on the big one.
Hi, Doc. Good morning to
How you
you.
doing?
Good. I can tell you right now, I don't have enough time for me to tell you everything I've seen in public housing. I grew up there, and it started off with the idea that it's supposed to be only temporary. You know, it's a place like I've taken relatives in my house, and until you get back on your feet, you get out and you do, you know, what you have to help yourself survive in this society, and that's what it was meant to be. When we moved in there, I was very young. To me, it was like a suburb. The grass was green. It was cut. The hedges were trimmed. The windows were always nicely painted and cleaned. But you walk through that neighborhood now, and I went through there 2 years ago. I live in Ohio now, of course. This is in Chicago. If you walk through there, you better be dressed in Kevlar.
This is a big debate. I don't know if you've been following what's going on with the Chicago public housing right now. This is a huge debate. They've had to demolish a bunch.
Oh,
They've
yeah.
built new ones. They're trying to come up with a new plan. It's failed, Edwin.
Exactly. It has failed big time. But, you know, that was done, of course, by Democrats over there because that's a sure vote. You take care of those guys, you house them, and that's a sure vote right there. I mean, it was done with all good intentions, but it was just taken advantage of.
How long were you in public housing? How long was your family there?
Well, you know, when I moved in there, Doc, it was the early 60s. I moved out of there in the mid-70s and got my parents out of there in the early 80s after I got out of the Marine Corps. And like I said, I just went back there because I went to my brothers, you know, of course, all our family's out. They have their own houses and everything. I mean, I guess not to pat ourselves on the back, maybe we kind of did it the right way. You know, we saved our money. We worked hard. We saved our money. We got into apartments. We saved our money again, but was able to buy houses. But there are still guys there, Doc, that this still amazes me. I'll tell you, guys they grew up with that were born there, they are now grandfathers. Their grandkids live in that public housing still. It's like, I don't know, like you said, it's free. It was free.
Do you think it teaches people a way of life? Because I think it does.
It teaches people a bad way of life. For those that are taught right and understand, like a lot of us have done, you know, I mean, when I say successful, we're working, you know, and everything. We're not at home. We're not in public housing. I'm not saying that they're bad, because that helped us out, and I thank God that was there to help us out.
But temporary, right? But temporary.
Temporary. That's what I meant by it was all done with good intentions. It's supposed to be a temporary thing, but no, there are guys there that are still living there, like I said before,
wow,
since when I was a little kid. And when I go through there, it just saddens me because these are guys I used to play baseball with when I was a kid, and now they're, I don't know, they're just, a lot of them are alcoholics, drug addicts. Some have died because of overdoses that I've heard, you know. And there was one guy that I used to keep in touch with there that I haven't heard from him anymore, and I don't know what's happened to him. I've even tried searching for him on Facebook and everything, and hoping to maybe run into him or something, but no. There's nobody.
Well, Edwin, I appreciate you sharing your experiences. I agree that it should be a temporary thing. And like I said, for a select few, for some, a very small number by comparison today's, you know, the number of people that are in public housing, I think it can be a help and maybe even needed. But if you're not careful, I do think it creates that environment, and it's learned behavior. You just learn as a child, this is normal. And then you grow up and you end up there and you teach your kids the same things. And it just keeps going like that. Look at it this way. Look at learned behavior in the rest of society. There is good learned behavior and bad learned behavior. How many actors, actresses, athletes, CEOs, how many of them had parents who also did that? How many actresses and actors do you see out there? Are they just naturally that gifted? Is their entire bloodline just gifted with acting? Some probably have a little bit more than others, but no, it's that they're around that environment. They get experiences. They learn from their parents what it takes to act or play ball or whatever. They get opportunities because of it, but overall, this is what we do. This is normal. Now, not all of them go into it, but they're around it, and there's a certain expectation. This is what life is to us. There's just too many examples out there. There are too many examples of people, middle class. I bet if you were raised middle class, you do things like your parents do, right? You may want more, you may work hard, you may have slightly different interests, you may have a different career, but I'll bet your expectations of how you live, the way your house is kept, are pretty close to your parents. We have learned that. That's why when I was talking about financial literacy the other day, I said it's so important for us to change the mindset and teach our kids that there are opportunities out there, and you've got to think like an entrepreneur, even if you are a person who's going to have a 9-to-5 job and have a more traditional middle-class American lifestyle. You still got to think more like an entrepreneur. You have to think more like a capitalist and say, how can I use whatever's going on right now to my financial advantage? Not screwing people over, not cheating, but you've got to think that way, and you've got to teach your kids that way. The other side is teaching your kids that this is normal to grow up in public housing and expect people to take care of you and expect there to be crime and drugs and depression and idle hands. You might as well teach them the other, right? It's Doc Thompson, 700 WLW. Doc Thompson on 700 WLW. Congratulations to our Capture the Cruise winners. I don't know how to pronounce their name. I got the Jankowski, Ashley Jankowski, and Chris Buenotello. Did I get that? Sherry Rowland, what is it? Am I close? Well, anyways, congratulations to them. They were the cute couple. They had a good time with them last Saturday. If you go to 700WLW.com, you could see the video that they shot of Lance and I as we showed these people that were taking part in the contest how to get it done. We were a formidable team. The cupcakes were excellent, too. Yes, they were. Talking about public housing expanding throughout the county. Is it a good idea? You want it in your neighborhood? Jenny Coleraine, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Well, the reason I called was my family. I had a large family, had a lot of kids. We moved into public housing probably 45, 50 years ago. But you know what? We had a wonderful apartment, but we had rules to live by. We had to keep the grass cut, our area cleaned up, put the garbage out. If we didn't do any of these things, we were fined money. We lived there about 5 years until we could get a little bit of money to move out and buy a little house in Coleraine, which is where I still live, raised all my kids here. So for us, it was really a good thing.
So this was 1960s era?
Yes.
Okay.
And another thing is they came around twice a year to inspect our apartments to see that we weren't damaging them in too many ways. You know, I knew people that had been put out because they didn't take care of their apartment.
So the penalty would be you may lose your place.
That's right. And so, but for me, it was great. We had a really nice apartment, and we had a little yard with grass, which was true. But if we didn't take care of that grass, we got fined for that. And we could go down to the office and get a lawnmower. We didn't have to buy a lawnmower.
But you had to do the work, though.
Yes. And so, but I had 7 kids, and so we had enough bedroom space. We had a nice bath. It was just really, really nice. We lived there about 5 years.
But, I mean, it was pretty different, though. If you're talking people could get expelled from their property for not taking care of it. Are you familiar with what public housing is like now?
No, not really, and unless you just look at the outside, you know.
Well, if you look at the stories, too, and I appreciate you sharing your story with us, Jenny. I think that's the idea and the initial idea behind public housing, help people for a short while, get back on their feet. Then you go out and, do something else, but you've got to take care of the public housing, not just because it's the right thing to do, and not just because you've got other people living there that, you don't want to create a slum for them, but because it's also your fellow communityites' tax dollars. They're providing for you. Respect what they give you. It's almost like if you rented a room out to somebody, or gave somebody a room, a brother-in-law, a cousin, a sister, whatever. Somebody said, hey, listen, I'm down on my luck. Can you help me out? And you say, you know what? Don't worry. Move in. I got an extra room. Stay with me for a year or so. Get on your feet. Don't worry about paying me any rent. Imagine if they came in, they start trashing the place. Now imagine you needed that help from somebody. Wouldn't you say, I'm going to make sure to respect that they're giving me a place to live. I'm not going to trash it. These things started out as good ideas. I like the idea, though, of inspecting it and saying if it's not kept up, guess what? You're out. This all started during the Great Depression. The idea of public housing started during the Great Depression. It was there was an act passed in 1934, the National Housing Act, and this was really the foundation for public housing today. Now, it has evolved with many changes in government and many pieces of legislation, but that was the foundation. And initially, it was to try to help make housing and mortgages more affordable for people, just to make it more affordable. That's where it started. And of course, then it evolved. We had a Housing Act of 37, of 49. By the time you get up to the Great Society with Lyndon Johnson, HUD was established, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It absorbed a bunch of this stuff. Then we launched Fannie and Freddie, too, to make housing more affordable. And the HUD took on the idea of, well, we're going to, in a lot of cases, just provide cheap or free housing to people. And it goes a couple of different ways. You've got government-owned public housing, and you've got Section 8. Government-owned public housing is primarily the government, whatever level that is, state, local, federal, they own the property and they give you a place to live or greatly reduce the price of what you would normally have to pay. They charge you a lot less, but they own it. Then you got Section 8, which is primarily the government will pay for your rent when you live in a private apartment. So you would rent from Doc the landlord, and I would get money from the government on your behalf, even though it's private and it's not public. Still funded throughout via the public, but the government or the public does not own it. Get some more of your calls coming up next. 700 WLW. 700 WLW coming up with the big show with Bill Cunningham. Willie's actually, he's out getting makeup and hair done. He's getting his makeup and hair done. Somebody's filling in for him by the name of Eric Dieters. We have a guy here used to work here by that name. Is that the same guy? I thought he left the comedy circuit. He was playing maybe he has some time off. Maybe he's playing here locally and fit it into his schedule. He's supposed to be on for Willie today at 12:06. An email from Glenn said, Doc, no need to play the, quote, race card. Most people on welfare and public housing are white. Please explain that to your listeners. Did I miss something, Doc? Don't your people know most people on welfare are white? When did welfare or public housing become a urban or black problem when the majority of people using the assistance are white? Please explain. I think I explained quite clearly, although a racist like Glenn wouldn't hear that. He's going to hear what he wants because everything in his life is filtered through race, that public housing, people in public housing come in all shapes, sizes. I think that's exactly what I said. Race, genders, ethnicities. It does not know any racial boundaries. I think I laid that out quite clearly. You know what? I don't have the exact numbers. What percentage and what numbers are white and black? I don't know. I'm not sure that it really matters. All we know is that there are a lot of people that are in public housing, I think, that shouldn't be, that public housing should be temporary, and also that public housing creates an environment that is not good, that continues to keep people in public housing. I think that's what's most important. To a racist like Glenn, though, it's going to be about race. A real quick little sidebar about his comment. I think it's interesting that when it comes to numbers, and in the past I have checked where nationwide, the number of people on welfare, for example, there were and have been, and I don't have the recent numbers in front of me, but in the past there have been more white people on welfare. By percentage, population, there's a greater percentage of black people, but a greater number of white. Those have been the statistics in the past. It's interesting if those continue, and he's right, that he would use them to his advantage when it comes to something like this point out that, again, he's the racist, that there are more white people on it. But if it came to pointing out that there are more black people needing help, then he would say, well, there's a greater percentage of blacks that are on it, so they need help and they're getting a raw deal. That's the game that people like Glenn play. That's the racist game. Spin the numbers to your advantage and play the race card instead of saying it's not a good environment. I don't think anybody really wants to live in public housing, certainly not the public housing that I see. Crime-riddled, drugs around, just slums. And instead of saying, how can we solve the problem? How can we create good environments and encourage people not to be there? It comes down to the same thing. What about me? What can I get out of it? Play the victim and play the race card. Sad. Sad that we try to have a good conversation here, talking about an issue that's going to face Hamilton County, that's going to face the tri-state, come up with some solutions, and people like that just fall into that same pattern. Doc Thompson on the home of the Reds, 700 WLW.